Why were the most feared men in uniform lowering their weapons? Dust choked the sunlight, turning the valley into a dim, suffocating haze. America's most elite stood frozen, their rifles drooping toward the earth, their shoulders sagging like men already defeated. These were operators trained to die fighting, the kind who never spoke of surrender, yet now even they seemed ready to bow to the inevitable. Something unseen had broken them. And in that stillness, where even breathing felt like an act of defiance, one figure moved. Not a man, not one of the SEALs, but a woman, alone. She stepped forward into the trap with nothing in her hands but a clipboard, no weapon, no armor, just steady, deliberate steps. Every eye turned toward her as if she'd walked out of a dream or a memory. And in that instant, though no one understood why, the valley's fate began to shift. Her name was Cross, to most just a logistics officer, an observer, a clerk sent to fill forms, but no one in that hollow could yet see the weight she carried behind her silence. Hours earlier, the desert had welcomed her with indifference. When her helicopter touched down at camp, the blades whipped grit into faces and tore dust into the lungs of tired men. Cross climbed down carefully, one hand steadying the duffel slung over her shoulder, the other pinning a clipboard to her chest. Her posture was upright, but her gait revealed something hidden, joints that ached, bones that remembered more pain than her records ever claimed. Around her, soldiers turned their heads. They didn't see a fighter. She wasn't bristling with gear. No scars peeked from beneath her sleeves. No weapon hung from her chest. Just clean lines, clipped hair, and a calm expression that didn't belong in a place where death waited behind every ridge. Chief Mason watched her from a distance. He leaned against a fuel depot, jaw clenched, arms crossed. Was the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he didn't speak. His second-in-command, Drew, stood nearby, shaking his head with quiet disdain. "That's our observer," muttered, his voice carrying just enough for to hear. Didn't answer, he didn't have to, his silence was enough. This was no place for observers. The land east of the camp was known only as the Hollow, a wide scar carved into the earth, its ridges steep, its shadows alive with menace. In the last 6 months, 4 SEAL teams had entered. Viper came back with half their number. Titan returned with 3, 2 of them carried on stretchers. Phantom never made it out. Shadow, the team now stationed at, had been bleeding men for weeks. 2 were already missing, and Grant, their beacons, gone silent after a broken transmission about movement in the rocks. No one wanted to walk into that valley again, but orders left them no choice. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, maps covered every wall. Red markers littered them like open wounds, each one a site of loss, each one a grave without a stone, stood before the team pointing at satellite images. His tone was clipped, reluctant, every word dragged from him like iron. The hollow 1 kilometers across, steep ridges, overlapping fire zones, no visible structures. Viper lost 5, Titan lost 5, Phantom all 8, Shadow already down 2. The silence was thick, oppressive. Men who never flinched at gunfire now avoided one another's eyes. At the back of the room sat Cross, clipboard balanced neatly across her knees. Her handwriting was precise, mechanical, as if carved into the paper rather than written. She hadn't spoken a word the entire briefing, not until she looked up and asked, almost casually, "What's the prevailing wind through the depression?" The room turned. Operators frowned, blinked as though she'd asked the color of the sand. It was Petty Officer, the comms man, who finally answered. "Southeast to northwest. Thermals rise during the day, drop after sunset." His voice was hesitant, confused. Cross simply nodded and returned to her notes. No explanation, no hint of what the question meant. Leaned toward his voice low, suspicious. "She's not logistics." Didn't reply, but his jaw worked hard against the thought. After the briefing, the ritual began. The kind of ritual soldiers perform when they know they may not return. Weapons were checked with obsessive focus, magazines seated, radios tested, Medic Jack laid out bandages and morphine with the precision of a surgeon who understood he might soon be his own patient. Cleaned his rifle in silence, motion steady, but his eyes heavy with the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from sleep deprivation. It comes from burying friends. And in the shadows of lockers and footlockers lay the most haunting preparations of all. Folded letters taped to the inside of doors, voice messages recorded and saved with names like "For Mom" or "For Anna." Photographs turned face down, waiting for hands that might never return to lift them again. Cross walked past these men like a ghost. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer words of comfort. Her silence pressed heavier than her presence. Some looked at her with contempt. To them, she was a clerk sent to witness their last attempt at an impossible mission. They didn't know what she carried in silence. Above camp, the sun burned without mercy. Heat shimmered off the ridges, bending the horizon like glass. Beyond those ridges, the hollow waited, patient, merciless. The mission was set for dawn. Shadow Team would descend once more. Cross was meant to stay on the ridge, clipboard in hand, recording their fate. That was the plan, but plans are fragile things. The convoy rolled out at first light. Engines growled against the desert silence, gravel crunching under wheels. 3 vehicles moved in staggered formation, their shadows stretching long across barren earth. The lead truck, indented from past blasts, set the pace. Behind it, a Humvee carried most of Shadow Team, their gear clattering with every bump. Dirt bikes fanned out on the flanks, scouts scanning the emptiness with wary eyes. Cross sat in the passenger seat of the Humvee, her clipboard gone. At her feet rested a small rucksack. She stared out the window with a focus that unsettled the men. She didn't chatter. She didn't ask questions. Her gaze tracked every ripple of dust, every bird startled from the brush, every shadow that shifted where no wind should have been. Leaned forward in the back, muttering under his breath. She watches like she's expecting ghosts. No one answered, but the thought lingered. The road into the hollow wasn't a road at all. It was a scar across stone, sharp rocks threatening the tires, ridges closing in like teeth. It felt less like traveling toward a mission and more like being swallowed by something alive. No one cracked jokes. No one spoke of home. The only voices were clipped radio calls, call signs repeated like prayers. When the convoy reached the overlook ridge called the halt, the vehicles fanned into a defensive arc. Engines idled. Dust rose, then settled in thick, heavy silence. Below them, the hollow stretched wide, 1.1 kilometers of jagged stone, a natural amphitheater carved by time and cruelty. From above, it looked peaceful, like a graveyard does when the mourners have left. The SEALs prepared. Weapons snapped into readiness. Sights were adjusted with hands steady on the outside but trembling deep within. Zipped his medic kit with fingers that didn't feel steady, no matter how well they moved. Cross walked alone to a rock outcropping. She found cover. She unfolded compact binoculars, their lenses catching the morning sun. She scanned the valley in silence, her face unreadable. Laid down the plan. Observer stays on the ridge. 15-minute comms checks. No deviations. His eyes flicked toward her, daring her to argue. She only nodded, calm, detached. But her gaze swept the valley as if she were reading an invisible map only she could see. One by one, Shadow Team descended. Their boots scraped stone, their silhouettes shrinking into the hollow. Each step felt like surrender to gravity, as though the valley itself demanded their lives. Cross sat back against the rock, her breath unnervingly steady. She raised her binoculars again, tracking the men until they disappeared into shadows. The first radio check came on time. Shadow 1 to Overwatch, entering target area, no contact. Her voice was calm, controlled. Overwatch copies, proceed. The second check came with static. Checkpoint Alpha secure, no threat, moving to grid 92 Delta 2. She logged the time in her notebook, 40 minutes in. Then the line broke apart. Static cracked like shattering glass. Words bled into emptiness. Shadow movement can't identify. And then silence. Cross-adjusted frequencies, primary, secondary, emergency. Every attempt came back empty. The hollow had swallowed their voices. Her binoculars swept the depression. At first she saw only wind, then shapes, dark figures hidden among rocks too still to be natural, rifles trained downward. The trap revealed itself. Her lenses found Chief standing in the open, rifle slack at his side. Around him, the team gathered with shoulders bowed. Their weapons hung limp, like men surrendering to something inevitable. The hollow had broken them, just as it had broken every team before. Cross lowered the binoculars, her jaw clenched. Then slowly she reached for her rucksack. Not for reports, not for paperwork. What she drew out was steel, a compact suppressed rifle, a sidearm worn smooth by years of use, a tactical harness from old fights. Her hands moved without hesitation, magazines locking into place with soft, final clicks. No request for permission, no word to. She fastened the harness, tightened the straps, and checked the wind. Then she began to climb. Not down into the hollow, not toward the open, but upward toward the eastern ridge, the hardest path of all. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Cross revealed the truth. She wasn't here to watch men die. She was here to rewrite the fight. How far can one person climb before fear drags them back down? Cross didn't ask herself that question. She didn't allow it. Fear had no place on the eastern ridge where every step was louder than thunder and every loose stone threatened to betray her. She moved like the terrain was alive, listening, waiting to catch her stumble. Gravel slid beneath her boots. The wind carried grit into her mouth. Her shoulder burned with the weight of the rifle. Still, she climbed. Below, Shadow Team was caught in the jaws of the hollow. Their rifles lowered, their bodies slumped with the unbearable gravity of defeat. From the ridges, enemy marksmen had them locked in crosshairs. All it would take was one word, one signal, and the valley floor would erupt into slaughter. But the signal never came. Not yet. The first sniper lay 17 meters below her. Cross flattened herself against the slope, belly scraping rock, hands steady against the dirt. Through her scope she saw him, body painted with dust, rifle angled down, eye fixed on men, patient, confident. She breathed once, deep, slow. Her trigger broke the silence with a whisper. The shot was clean, precise. The man's chest folded inward, his weapon sliding uselessly against the stone. His body slumped forward like a puppet with strings cut. No cry, no alarm, just dust settling. Cross moved again before his shadow had cooled. Her body hugged the rocks, sliding forward, controlled. Each step was measured, her muscles screaming but her focus sharper than the edge of her blade. A cave loomed ahead, narrow and deep. Voices echoed inside, low and steady. 2 men. She crouched against the wall, listening, waiting for the rhythm of their breaths. Her hand found a grenade. Pin pulled. Spoon snapped. She rolled it inside. The blast roared like thunder trapped in a bottle. Smoke and dust belched out of the cave mouth. One figure stumbled into the open, coughing, weapon rising. Cross lunged. Her knife flashed once. A quiet, final sound. The man fell, body crumpling into dust. Her shoulder ached, the sudden motion tearing something beneath her skin. She ignored it, wiped the blade clean, brought her rifle back up. From below, men stirred at the sound. They pressed against cover, eyes lifting toward the ridges. "Someone's hitting them," muttered. But no answer came. Cross had already moved on. The third position was the strongest. A sniper hidden in a natural chimney, high above, overlooking every angle of the valley floor. To reach it, she would have to cross open ground. 17 rounds left in her current magazine. Enough if she didn't miss. Her boots dug deep. She sprinted low, body angled, rifle raised. Bullets cracked past her head. Stone splinters burst against her cheek. One round clipped her shoulder, tearing cloth, drawing blood that ran hot and sticky down her arm. She didn't slow. 3 shots answered, controlled, precise. The sniper's body jerked, weapon clattering against stone. Silence followed. Cross ducked into the shadow of the chimney, chest heaving. Blood soaked into her harness strap. She pressed gauze beneath it, her fingers slippery with red. Pain radiated down her arm, but her eyes never wavered. She wasn't here to feel. She was here to end this. Below, Shadow Team lifted their heads. The rhythm of the gunfire, measured, deliberate, was unlike theirs. Overwatch, this is Shadow One, voice pressed through static. Who's engaging targets? The pause stretched, then her voice came through. Calm, steady, unshaken. I am. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Looked up at the ridge, jaw clenched, rifle tightening in his grip. He didn't know whether to curse her or thank her, but he knew one thing: she had changed the fight. Another burst echoed. A figure tumbled from the ridge, lifeless, body crashing against stone before disappearing into dust. The SEALs straightened, rifles lifted, shoulders squared. For the first time in months, hope flickered in their eyes. Whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief, "She's doing this alone." No one corrected him. Cross moved like a shadow stitched into stone. Every position she cleared weakened the net around Shadow Team. Her figure ghosted from cover to cover, relentless. The hollow, once a predator's den, was bleeding piece by piece under her quiet assault. She pressed her mic again. Grid 92 Delta 3 clear. The words hit like lightning. That was the grid where and had vanished. For a heartbeat froze. Then the team surged forward, boots hammering against rock. The possibility of rescue hit them harder than any order could. The cave they found was shallow, choked with dust and rubble. Inside lay 2 broken figures and Grant, uniforms torn, blood dark against their sleeves. Their eyes opened weakly, barely clinging to life. Medic dropped to his knees. His hands moved fast, ruthless. Bandages, morphine, IV lines stabbed into trembling veins. "They're alive," he breathed, voice hoarse, still breathing. Alive, against every rule of probability. His jaw clenched, he signaled his men. They lifted the wounded carefully, straps tightening, gear clattering. Above them, Cross scanned the horizon, rifle steady, blood dripping from her sleeve. She watched the team move, then followed at a distance, always scanning, always ready. Pressed his radio. "Overwatch, we have them, requesting medevac." Her reply came without hesitation. "Already signaled, bird inbound." Minutes later, the thrum of rotors split the sky. A swept low, its downdraft churning dust into a storm. Shadow Team hustled toward the landing zone, carrying in. Cross trailed behind, rifle raised even as her steps faltered. Noticed the crimson running down her arm. "Commander, you're hit," he shouted above the noise. She didn't answer, just kept moving. The helicopter slammed against the dirt. Crewmen rushed out, hauling the wounded inside. Shadow Team piled in after them, adrenaline flooding out of their veins, exhaustion crashing in. Reached back, grabbing Cross's arm, pulling her onto the ramp. For the first time, she stumbled. Blood streaked across her uniform, pooling against the metal floor. She took one sharp breath, then straightened, eyes locked forward as the doors slammed shut. The lifted, engine screaming. The hollow shrank beneath them, swallowed by dust. Inside, silence fell heavy. Men leaned against steel walls, drained, broken, yet alive. Cross sat opposite, her rifle between her knees. She pressed gauze into her wound with mechanical calm, as if patching paperwork. Her gaze drifted to the window, detached, unreadable. Couldn't hold it back any longer. He leaned forward, voice low. "What are you really?" Her eyes flicked toward him, steady as stone. "I used to do logistics," she said, a pause, "but for missions no one puts on a map." The words landed heavier than any gunfire. Shook his head, almost laughing. "You're not an observer, you never were." Cross said nothing more. The helicopter carried them across the desert, the hollow fading into shadow as if it had never existed. Back at camp, the wounded were rushed to medics. Shadow teams stumbled after them, battered but alive. Cross stepped down from the ramp last. Blood painted her sleeve, her boots. Medics tried to pull her inside. She waved them off. "I'm green," she muttered. By nightfall, paperwork began. Reports written in neat lines, stamped with red ink, filed under projects that didn't exist. The official record told a sanitized story, unexpected developments, enemy withdrawal. Cross's name appeared nowhere. Before dawn, her quarters were cleared. Travel orders processed without anyone seeing her leave. When the sun rose, she was gone. No farewell, no trace, not even a rumor. It was as if Commander Cross had never been there at all. But someone remembered. On the bulletin board inside the operations center, a patch appeared overnight. Black fabric, gray stitching, the jagged outline of the hollow. Beneath it, 2 words. Cross. No unit designation, no rank, no explanation. Men stopped and stared. They didn't ask who pinned it there. They didn't need to. The patch said enough. It was recognition, a silent tribute. Because sometimes the most dangerous person doesn't look dangerous at all. Sometimes survival depends on the one you underestimated. Kept that patch tucked into his kit from that day forward. He never explained it, even when asked. He'd only shake his head and say, "Don't make assumptions. They'll kill you faster than bullets." And so the story spread. A nameless officer who wasn't what she seemed. A woman who walked into a kill zone and rewrote the fight alone. No medals, no parades. Just whispers in the ranks. In one patch on a wall. Because some victories are too heavy to ever be written in full. What kind of person walks into a kill zone with nothing but silence for armor? And no one spoke her name after she vanished. They didn't have to. The hollow was no longer just a place. It was a story, whispered from one rotation of operators to the next. A valley where 4 teams had broken. And then, a woman who didn't. But legends never appear fully formed. They grow from wounds, from decisions made when no one was watching. Far from weeks later, a file crossed a desk inside a secure building without a nameplate. The kind of building the government never admitted existed. The file was thin, almost insultingly so. 2 photos, a stack of reports, and a line scribbled at the bottom of a clearance sheet. Cross, recommend continued silence. Silence, that word followed like a shadow. She had been trained for it, molded by it, broken and rebuilt until silence became her language. But silence was not where she began. Years earlier, before the hollow, before her name became a whisper in the ranks, had been a cadet. Ordinary on paper, quick with logistics, sharp with numbers, someone who saw patterns in chaos that others overlooked. The kind of mind that could balance a supply chain like others balanced a rifle. She was never meant for the field, that's what they told her. She didn't look the part, too quiet, too observant, a clerk, not a killer. But war doesn't care about the labels men write on you. Her first deployment had been to a forward operating base near Kandahar. She was 26. She carried clipboards, manifests, radio codes. The air there smelled like dust, diesel, and the faint copper of blood dried too long in the sun. One night the base was hit. Mortar fire ripped through the perimeter, alarms shrieking into the desert. Soldiers scrambled, grabbing rifles, sprinting toward the fire. Did what she was told, ran for the bunker. But halfway there she stopped. The motor pool had been struck. Flames licked across fuel drums. A truck was burning hot enough to ignite everything around it. And through the heat shimmer she saw him, a mechanic pinned beneath a half-collapsed frame. No one else noticed. She dropped the clipboard. Ran into the fire. Her hands blistered as she hauled on the twisted frame. Her throat filled with smoke. She had no training for this, no weapon, no reason to try, but the man's eyes were open. He was alive. And she refused to leave him. It took 3 soldiers to drag them both out. The explosion came seconds later, a blast that scorched the night. The mechanic lived, but barely. Was treated for burns, smoke inhalation, broken ribs from where she had thrown herself over him at the last second. When she woke in the infirmary, the commander told her she was reckless, foolish, lucky. But someone else had been watching. That night, an officer she'd never seen before visited her cot. He asked no questions. He only said one sentence. "You notice things others miss, and you move before fear tells you not to." That officer never gave his name, but within weeks, orders changed. She was transferred to a unit that didn't exist on paper. Her role was still logistics. But her training shifted, quietly, relentlessly. Weapons she wasn't supposed to touch found their way into her hands. Languages no one thought she needed became part of her nights. Tracking, fieldcraft, the kind of lessons meant for people who would never wear medals because their missions would never be spoken aloud. Her instructors didn't coddle her. They didn't believe in her, at first. "You're not built for this," one of them said during a grueling exercise in the mountains. Snow froze her fingers, her lungs burned, her legs screamed for rest. She didn't answer. She just kept climbing. Hours later, when the others gave up, she was the one who reached the ridge, frozen, exhausted, but standing. Silence was her answer. It always had been. And so, over years, Cross became 2 people. On record, a logistics officer moving units, balancing manifests, signing her name in tidy, controlled handwriting. Off record, a shadow threaded into operations that never happened. Missions where she carried no flag, where success meant no one knew she had ever been there. It left scars. There were nights when she sat alone in temporary quarters, staring at the photo she never let anyone else see. A boy, maybe 6 years old, missing his front teeth, smile wide and fearless. Her son, left with her sister when deployments bled into months, then years. She never explained where she went. She only wrote letters that began with, "I'll be home soon," letters she never truly believed. The boy grew older in photographs, 1st grade, then 2nd, then soccer uniforms and missing teeth replaced by braces. His face aged too, but quietly, as if the years didn't pass the same way for her. Every mission carried the same unspoken weight. What would happen if the silence became permanent? If she vanished into one of those places where names were never written, where bodies were never found? She buried the fear, buried it deep, but it never left. And maybe that's why it felt so final. Because the Hollow was not just a mission. It was a graveyard, 4 teams broken, 2 men already missing. She saw it in his eyes, in silence, in the folded letters tucked inside lockers. The valley was a mouth that only swallowed. And for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe this was where her silence would end too. But Cross had never been one to accept what others decided. That's why, when she saw Shadow Team lower their weapons, when she saw shoulders bow beneath the certainty of death, she did what no one expected. She moved, not because she believed she would survive, but because she believed there are moments when silence is betrayal. And so she climbed. The ridge cut into her palms, blood soaked her sleeve, her lungs burned, still she climbed. One step after another, every heartbeat stolen, every breath borrowed. And when her rifle spoke, the Hollow changed. It was not glory, it was not heroics. It was survival. Shadow Team carried that memory back with them, but they never told the whole story. They never explained how a woman with a clipboard turned the fight alone. They only whispered it, half in disbelief, half in awe. Gross. The words appeared on a patch, stitched in gray on black, anonymous, silent. And somewhere far from, Cross stared at another letter she would never send. She wrote it anyway, carefully, slowly. "I missed your game again, I'm sorry. I'll be home soon." She folded it, placed it with the others, and waited for the next set of orders that would arrive in silence. What happens to soldiers when survival feels like betrayal? Shadow Team should have been dead. Every calculation, every briefing, every grim memory of the Hollow had already written their names into the dirt. And yet they returned. Not whole, not unscarred, but breathing. And lived. And lived. All of them lived. And survival weighed heavier than loss. The medics worked without rest through the night. Needles pierced skin, morphine hissed into veins, blood transfusions ran in fragile threads. Inside the tent, drifted in and out of consciousness. His voice rasped like sandpaper, but every time his eyes opened, he searched the room until leaned close enough for him to see. "You're back," whispered. Nodded, though his throat tightened with words he couldn't say. He gripped his brother's shoulder, not gently, but as if the weight of that contact was the only proof they were still alive. Bandage to the chest, grabbed wrist with surprising strength. "Who pulled us out?" Hesitated, his mouth opened then closed. Finally he whispered, "You don't want the answer." But the truth seeped through the team anyway. They had seen her. On the ridge. Rifle raised, blood staining her sleeve, moving with the precision of someone who didn't exist on paper. Commander Cross. A logistics officer who fought like she had been born for the shadows. The operators didn't speak her name aloud, not where anyone outside the team could hear. But in quiet moments between IV checks and half-slept nights, they whispered. She carried it alone. Turned the Hollow into a graveyard for them, not us. No one's going to believe it. And yet none of them doubted it. Said little, but when he walked past the tactical board, his eyes always fell to the patch. The one stitched black and gray, left anonymously. Cross, he didn't touch it. He didn't need to. Just seeing it there was enough to remind him. Some debts are too heavy for words. The brass, of course, had other ideas. 3 days later, a convoy rolled into carrying men in clean uniforms, untouched by sand or blood. They weren't SEALs. They weren't soldiers at all, not in the way, and his team defined the word. They were observers, analysts, officials. Their boots shone. Their questions came sharp, controlled, rehearsed. Describe the engagement. Identify the timeline. What factors contributed to the survival of Anne? Sat across from them, jaw tight, hands knotted into fists. The room stank of diesel and dust, but the men asking questions smelled like paper and ink. He hated them instantly. Factors, repeated, his voice flat. We fought. The official adjusted his glasses, unimpressed. Records indicate an enemy withdrawal. Leaned forward, eyes burning. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Chief? The silence stretched. Jaw flexed. He thought of her face, calm even as blood dripped down her sleeve. He thought of her rifle cracking against the ridge, each shot like oxygen to his dying men. And then he said nothing. The officials left with thin smiles, satisfied. The record would be clean, would remain a scar on the desert, unexplained, unredeemed. Because silence served them. And Cross had always understood silence. By then she was already gone. No farewell, no orders given in front of witnesses, just an empty bunk, a duffel no one remembered seeing her carry, and a trail of paperwork that ended before it began. It unsettled more than he admitted. He had faced death enough times to understand its shape, but Cross was something else. She had walked into their lives, carried their survival in her hands, and vanished without leaving even the comfort of anger or grief. She was a ghost, and ghosts don't ask permission before they haunt you. Wrestled with it differently. He spent hours at the range, firing until his shoulder bruised as if enough bullets could match the rhythm of hers. He didn't talk about her, but every magazine he slammed home was a question he couldn't shake. How? Who trained her? Why here with us and why leave without a word? One night he asked directly. She saved us. Why cover it up? Why let them erase her? Didn't look up from cleaning his rifle. His hands moved steady, slow, as if he'd been expecting the question all along. Because some wars aren't meant to be recorded, said, and some people aren't meant to be known. His jaw tightened. That's not good enough. No, agreed quietly, it's not. But that was all he said. Outside, beyond the perimeter wire, the desert stretched endless. Wind cut over the ridges. The hollow slept again, quiet as a tomb, as though it hadn't nearly consumed them all. And somewhere beyond that horizon, Cross sat in a dim motel room with a single lamp casting shadows against the wall. Her arm was bandaged, the wound still raw. Her duffel sat at the foot of the bed. On the desk lay her rifle, stripped and cleaned with meticulous care. Each piece shone under the weak light. Beside it lay a folded letter, unsent, addressed in neat handwriting to a boy who would never read it. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'll be home soon. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she folded it, slid it into the stack already waiting inside her bag. Letters carried like weapons, sharp with guilt, heavy with hope. Her phone buzzed. No name on the screen, just a number she knew by memory. She answered with silence. The voice on the other end was low, calm, detached. Is closed. The report is filed. You're moving again. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask why. She only said when. Now. The line went dead. Sat for a moment longer. Her hand brushed the rifle, the cool metal against her skin steadying her heartbeat. Then she packed it, packed the letters, pulled on her jacket. When she closed the motel door behind her, the room looked the same as when she had entered. No trace she'd ever been there. Just as it had been just as it had been everywhere. And yet her silence wasn't empty. It echoed. In the questions couldn't stop asking. In the way hand lingered against the patch whenever he passed it. In the way men who had nearly surrendered now held their rifles with shoulders squared, remembering the sound of unseen fire from the ridge. Cross had vanished, but her absence was louder than most people's presence. Because some victories you can't parade, some truths you can't record, and some warriors you can't claim. What happens when the next call comes before the blood on your hands has even dried? Cross knew better than to expect rest. Hadn't ended anything. It had only confirmed what the nameless voices on the other end of the phone already believed, that she was still useful, that she could be sent again. She didn't argue, she never did. The flight that carried her out of the desert was unmarked, no insignia, no questions. She sat alone, loose across her lap, the steady drone of engines pressing against her ears like a lullaby she refused to sleep through. Out the window, the horizon stretched endless. Dark ridges cut across the sand like scars. She kept her gaze fixed there, because the alternative was to close her eyes and see what she didn't want to. The hollow, the faces of the men who had surrendered, the blood on her sleeve when she pulled the trigger again and again. She didn't sleep. She hadn't in days. The landing came at dawn. The air was cooler, wetter, carrying the faint bite of salt. She smelled the ocean before she saw it. The base was small, tucked into the cliffs of an unnamed coastline. Its perimeter fencing sagged, rust streaking the barbed wire. The paint on the watchtower peeled. It looked abandoned but had learned that appearances lied. A man waited for her at the gate, not in uniform. Civilian clothes, pressed but plain. His shoes were too clean for the mud underfoot. He carried no weapon, but his eyes carried authority. "You're late," he said. Didn't answer. She wasn't late. The plane had landed when they told it to. The man's words were a test, nothing more. He turned on his heel and walked. She followed. The briefing room was little more than a shack with maps nailed to the wall and a projector humming faintly in the corner. Inside, two others waited. A woman in fatigues, younger than her, eyes sharp but restless, and a tall man whose beard was flecked with gray, arms folded, expression unreadable. The civilian shut the door. "Your objective is extraction," he said, wasting no time. "One target, high-value asset, location here." He tapped the map. A red circle marked the outskirts of a jungle town pressed against the river. "Secondary militia presence is heavy. Your window is small, too small for a team. That's why you're here." His eyes flicked to the younger woman. She shifted uncomfortably under the weight of that glance. "You're not coming with us." The civilian's lips twitched. "Not us, just her." He nodded toward, "You're an observer." The younger soldier bristled. "Observer? She doesn't even." The gray-bearded man lifted a hand, silencing her. His eyes studied, not with contempt but with something closer to recognition, as if he already knew better than to underestimate her. "Didn't speak, she didn't need to." The civilian continued. "The target is doctor, humanitarian doctor, taken 3 weeks ago. Hostage leverage. We've confirmed he's alive, for now. You'll find him in the compound here." He tapped again. "Intel suggests they move him every few days. Your clock is already ticking." "Extraction route?" the bearded man asked. The civilian smiled faintly. "Improvised." "That meant none." The younger soldier scoffed. "This is suicide." Finally spoke, her voice even measured. "Window. 48 hours." She nodded once, nothing more. The briefing ended as abruptly as it began. The younger soldier left in frustration, muttering under her breath. The civilian vanished through the door, already dialing another phone. The bearded man lingered. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Packed her notes, sliding them into the rucksack she never let out of her reach. "Everyone has a role." He studied her. Then with a faint nod he said, "Some roles don't make it into the record." Their eyes met for a moment. In his gaze she saw the flicker of understanding. He'd been part of something like this once. He knew what it meant to walk alone. That night lay awake on a cot that creaked with every shift of her weight. Rain pattered against the tin roof. The ocean crashed distantly against the cliffs. She wrote another letter she would never send. "They've asked me to go again. I don't know if I'll come back this time. I don't know if you'll ever read these. But I keep writing them because it's the only way I can pretend I'm still here, that I'm still your mother." Her hand paused. She stared at the words, the ink smudging beneath her thumb. Then she folded the paper neatly, slid it into the growing stack, and sealed the bag shut. At dawn she moved. The jungle swallowed her whole. Heat wrapped around her like a second skin. Humidity clung to her lungs. Every insect buzzed like an alarm. Every leaf crackled too loudly beneath her boots. She moved slow, patient, her rifle close, her eyes scanning the green. By mid-afternoon she reached the town. Crumbling walls, tin roofs, muddy streets. Children darted barefoot between the shacks, their laughter too bright against the tension simmering in the air. Melted into the shadows, slipping between alleyways, using noise to mask her presence. The compound stood near the river, fences topped with rusting barbed wire, guard towers patched together with scrap. She studied it from the tree line, every detail noted. 2 patrols rotating on the hour, snipers in the towers, 1 heavy machine gun at the gate, too much for 1 person on paper. But Cross was not on paper. Night fell. Rain came again, heavy, drumming against tin roofs and earth alike. The guards shifted restlessly, their vision blurred by the downpour. Moved with the storm, slipping between the raindrops, crawling through mud that clung to her uniform, her rifle wrapped in cloth to hide its reflection. She reached the fence, cut it silently, slipped inside. The first guard never saw her. Her blade caught him beneath the jaw, hand muffling his cry, body lowered into the mud without a sound. The second fell to a suppressed shot, his body swallowed by the rain. She moved through the compound like a shadow that refused to be noticed. Every turn was calculated. Every breath counted. At last she reached the inner room. Sat chained to a chair, his body frail, his beard matted, eyes hollow. He flinched when the door opened, expecting another tormentor. But instead he saw her. A woman with no insignia, no flag, no explanation. Her voice was calm, firm. "Doctor, I'm here to take you home." His lips trembled, a whisper barely audible through the storm. "Why you?" She didn't answer, not then. Because she knew the truth. Sometimes, the ones who save you are the ones you'll never be allowed to remember. How long can one person carry another's life before the weight becomes unbearable? Cross didn't ask the question, she only acted. The room stank of mildew, rust, and human despair. Doctor flinched against his chains as she approached, his body trembling with the fragility of someone held too long in darkness. She crouched, her rifle slung across her back, her movements slow, deliberate. "I'm here to get you out," she whispered. His eyes darted, desperate and suspicious. "They'll kill us." "They already planned to," she replied softly. "That's why we leave now." She pulled tools from her harness, quiet steel against steel as she worked the lock. Her hands moved with the same steadiness she used when loading a rifle, controlled even as her pulse pressed hard against her throat. The lock snapped. But chains don't fall quietly. The metal clink echoed louder than thunder in the silence. Froze. His head snapped to the door. Footsteps, voices. She rose instantly, rifle back in her grip, body angled between and the entrance. The door swung open. The first guard stepped through and never left. A suppressed shot split the air, his body folding against the frame. The second raised his weapon, shouting. Dropped to a knee, 2 more shots barking. His body crumpled across the threshold. The compound woke. Shouts filled the rain-soaked night. Boots pounded mud. Floodlights cracked on, tearing white beams across the courtyard. Dragged to his feet, he stumbled, legs shaking. She hooked his arm over her shoulder, half carrying him. Her own wound burned from his ridge, but she forced her body to ignore it. They moved through the compound, shadows chasing them, rifles firing from every angle. Bullets ripped against corrugated steel, sparks spitting. The doctor whimpered with every shot. His grip only tightened. "Keep moving," she ordered. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that left no room for refusal. They reached the outer fence. Guards poured into the courtyard behind them. The machine gun at the gate roared to life, its rounds chewing through mud and rain. Shoved to the ground, rolling over him, pressing him flat as dirt exploded inches from his face. Her rifle barked back, controlled bursts. The gunner fell silent, his body slumped across the weapon. She hauled up again. They ran. Through the fence, into the jungle. Branches whipped against their faces. Mud sucked at their boots. The rain drowned every sound except their breathing, his panicked, ragged, her steady, deliberate. Behind them, shouts grew fainter. The jungle swallowed noise, swallowed men, but it never swallowed fear. An hour later they collapsed beneath a canopy, lungs burning, clothes soaked. Clutched his side, trembling, eyes wide. "Why?" he rasped. "Why risk this? I'm not worth it." Stared at him, her face unreadable, her breath steady despite the chase. "Because you are alive," she said simply, "and alive is always worth it." The words landed heavy, not because they were dramatic, but because she meant them with a conviction no one had spoken to him in weeks. Lowered his gaze, he didn't argue. She checked the compass strapped to her harness, then the small waterproof map she had memorized. "We move north, 2 days, extraction point." His head snapped up. 2 days through this. "Yes." He laughed once, bitter, hopeless. "I won't survive." His eyes met his, sharp as glass. "Then I'll carry you." Her tone made him believe her. They moved again. The jungle tested them with every step. Mud swallowed boots, insects bit exposed skin, roots caught at their legs. At night, the rain cooled but never stopped. Set small fires that smoked instead of burned, keeping predators away without drawing eyes. tried to talk, tried to ask who she was, why she'd been sent, why a woman who looked like a clerk carried herself like a shadow, said little, only what was necessary. Drink. Rest 10 minutes. Move. Her silence unsettled him, but in the silence he also felt something else, safety. On the second night, the militia caught up. They came in the dark, rifles gleaming under faint moonlight, machetes glinting. Heard them before did, the shuffle of boots, the hiss of whispers carried on damp air. She pressed into the mud, finger to her lips. His breath came ragged, uncontrolled. She steadied his shaking hand against the earth. The patrol passed close, too close. One man lingered, scanning the brush. His eyes narrowed, his weapon raised. Moved before thought caught up. Her knife flashed once, precise, her hand muffling his throat as his body dropped into silence. She dragged him into the ferns, covered the blood with wet leaves. The others never noticed. When they were gone, stared at her, his voice trembled. "You've done this before." Her gaze flicked to him. No denial, no confirmation, only silence. They moved again. By dawn, they reached the river, wide, brown, choked with debris. The extraction point lay on the far bank, but crossing meant risk. No cover, no guarantee. Studied the water, her jaw tight. She could feel eyes on her, waiting for an answer she didn't yet have. Finally she said, "We cross here." His voice cracked, "We'll drown." "Not if you trust me." She lashed together a makeshift raft from fallen branches, vines pulled taut. It wasn't strong, but it would float long enough. She shoved it into the water, guided onto it, then slipped beside him. The current seized them instantly. Water slapped against their faces, pulling them downstream. Arms burned as she paddled, steering them toward the far shore, clung desperately, coughing, sputtering. Halfway across, rifles cracked from the tree line. Bullets stitched the water. Splashes leapt inches from their heads. Rolled off the raft, body submerged, dragging with her. Her rifle stayed slung tight, waterproofed. She kicked hard, every motion controlled. Her lungs screamed. The current dragged them, bullets hissing above like angry wasps. At last her boots scraped mud. She shoved onto the bank, heaving herself up behind him. She rolled, raised her rifle and fired back. Controlled bursts. 2 rifles fell silent. The others scattered, their shots wild. Silence returned, broken only by gasping sobs. Checked him quickly. No wounds, just fear. "Keep moving," she ordered, her own breath ragged now. They staggered into the trees. Hours later they reached the clearing. A flare gun sat in her hand, already prepared. She fired. The red streak arced into the sky, burning against the gray dawn. Minutes passed like hours, then rotors. A helicopter thundered over the tree line, descending fast. Its downdraft flattened the grass, whipping leaves into a storm. His eyes filled with tears. "We're saved." But didn't look relieved. She kept her rifle raised until the bird touched down, until the side door slid open, until she saw the crewman's face. Only then did she lower it. She shoved inside, climbing after him. Her body trembled with exhaustion now, the wound in her shoulder reopened, blood soaking fresh through her sleeve. She ignored it. Clutched her hand, voice breaking. "I owe you my life." Her gaze met his. For the first time something flickered in her eyes, sorrow maybe, regret. "You owe me nothing," she said quietly. "Just don't forget you were alive when they expected you dead." The helicopter lifted. The jungle shrank below. The compound disappeared into green shadows. Leaned back, tears streaking his face, whispering prayers. Cross said nothing, because silence had always been her answer. What happens when the person you save refuses to forget you? Doctor was not a soldier. He had no clearance, no call sign, no training in silence. He was a doctor who had looked into the eyes of the woman who pulled him from chains and rain, who had seen the precision in her violence and the steadiness in her mercy. And unlike his men at did not belong to the system that thrived on forgetting. He would not be told to stay quiet. The helicopter carried them to a coastal airfield, its cracked tarmac glistening with the last of the rain. Medics swarmed the moment his boots hit the ground, wrapping blankets around him, pressing water to his lips. He tried to speak, to point to, but she had already slipped away, fading into the line of crew and soldiers moving crates. By the time he turned again, she was gone. They flew him back to the capital within hours. Cameras flashed. Politicians spoke. The world called it a miracle. A humanitarian hero returned, a doctor spared from the cruelty of warlords. Stood before microphones, pale but alive, the light too bright after weeks in darkness. He thanked the agencies, the organizations, the officials. But in every speech, he searched the crowd for her. And never found her. Behind the glass of a secure building, watched the broadcasts in silence. She stood in a room with no windows, walls humming faintly with servers. A man in a suit leaned beside her, arms crossed. "He's useful alive," the man said. "His work matters, his voice matters, yours doesn't." Said nothing. The man smirked faintly. "You don't need gratitude. That's the point of people like you. You make ghosts out of yourself so others can keep breathing." Still she said nothing. But inside, something shifted. Because she had seen his eyes when he clutched her hand in the helicopter. He hadn't looked at her like a ghost. He had looked at her like a savior. And saviors are remembered. 3 days later, walked out of a press conference and into a waiting car. Inside, he found a small envelope on the seat. No handwriting, no markings, just 2 words typed neatly on white paper. "Forget her." His breath caught. His hands shook as he folded the paper, pressing it into his pocket, but he couldn't forget. At night he dreamed of her voice, calm, firm. "Alive is always worth it." And he wondered, who saves the savior? Cross didn't wonder. She moved again. Orders came in silence, as they always did. A transfer to another staging ground, another nameless building, another cot that smelled of mildew and exhaustion. She carried the same duffel, the same rifle, the same stack of folded letters she never sent. But something stayed with her this time. Not a scar, not a wound. A memory of defiance, the way he looked at her like she was human instead of a shadow. It unsettled her more than the firefights. As she had been erased without effort. Operators were trained to bury what they saw. Silence was loyalty in its own form. Questions faded into unspoken respect. That was how the system worked. But civilians, doctors, men who lived because she chose not to let them die. They weren't bound by silence. Which meant her world, carefully built, carefully hidden, was suddenly fragile. It began with a phone call. Not the usual voice, not the clipped commands of handlers, but a softer one, male, familiar. "I know you're listening," said, his voice low, trembling but steady enough. "You don't want to be found, but I can't just thank a shadow. Whoever you are, whatever they call you, I need you to hear this. You saved me, not them. You." Sat on the edge of her cot, phone pressed to her ear. Her chest tightened in a way bullets never had. He continued, voice breaking. "They want me to move on, to forget, but I won't. Because alive is worth it, you said that, and if that's true, then so are you." She closed her eyes. The line went silent. Then she ended the call. The next day, her orders changed again. This time not to a battlefield, not to a jungle or desert, but to a briefing room filled with men in suits. They circled her like vultures, their words polished, rehearsed. "You've compromised protocol. You've become a liability. He's asking questions, too many." Sat still, hands folded on the table. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain, because explanations never mattered. Finally, one of them leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "Do you understand what you are, Commander Cross?" Her eyes met his, calm, steady, disposable. The word hung in the air, none of them it. That night she returned to her quarters. She sat at the desk, staring at the stack of letters. Her hand hovered over the pen, but she didn't write. For the first time, words failed her. Because the truth pressed heavy in her chest, hadn't just survived because of her. He had reminded her of something she had long buried, that she wanted to be more than silence. She wanted to be remembered. But memory was dangerous. And the men in suits weren't wrong. Her survival depended on disappearing. So she made a choice. The next morning left his hotel with a new security detail. He carried folders, notes, press briefings. As he crossed the lobby, he noticed a figure at the far end of the hall, plain clothes, head low, moving against the current of people. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Gross. Then she was gone, slipping through the revolving door, swallowed by the city. Froze, papers slipping from his hands. His guards barked questions, but he didn't answer. Because he understood something in that moment. She wasn't a ghost. She was choosing silence. Not because she wanted it, but because it was the only way she knew how to live. And for the first time since his rescue, prayed not just for himself, not just for his patients, but for her. Because he feared that one day, silence would be the death of her. What remains when silence outlives you? For Cross, that question had lingered longer than any bullet wound, longer than the nights alone on steel cots, longer than the years measured not in birthdays or anniversaries, but in missions that never made it to paper. After the jungle, after's eyes refused to forget her, silence grew heavier. It clung to her the way dust had clung to that desert valley, the way rain had soaked her skin in the jungle, and for the first time began to wonder if silence was protection or punishment. Her next assignment confirmed it. It was supposed to be simple: observe a border transfer. 2 convoys, 2 flags pretending to cooperate while the world turned its gaze elsewhere. She arrived with her clipboard, her rucksack, her rifle buried beneath layers of fabric that no one thought to question. But nothing was simple anymore. Not when one side decided cooperation was weakness. Not when gunfire erupted between men who were supposed to shake hands. Not when stood in the middle of it all, the observer once again. She moved without thought, rifle unslung, shots precise. She shielded the unarmed, dragged the wounded to cover, silenced the threat before it could spread. When the smoke cleared, the officials stared at her with the same wide eyes once had on that ridge. The same disbelief whispered into the dust. And within hours, the same story repeated. No mention of her in the record, no acknowledgement in the debrief, only red stamps on reports that said nothing, only silence. But this time didn't wait for orders. She packed her duffel, she walked away. No one stopped her, no one dared. For weeks she drifted, across borders, through cities that smelled of diesel and fried food, where no one cared who she was or what she carried. She stayed in rooms with peeling wallpaper, wrote more letters she never sent, folded them into the same stack, tucked them into the same bag. Until one evening, in a crowded train station, she heard a voice. "Commander." She turned. Chief Mason stood there, older, his uniform replaced by plain clothes, but his presence unmistakable. For a moment neither spoke. The sound of trains, footsteps, announcements filled the silence. Then said, "You should know, Shadow Team still carries your patch." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him. "They don't speak of you," continued. "Not to outsiders, not even to other operators. But when the new ones ask about the hollow, they point to the patch. And they say, don't underestimate what silence can do." Looked away, her jaw set. "And you?" His eyes didn't waver. "I don't forget who saved us, even if the record does." She almost smiled, almost, but instead she said, "You should let it go, forget me like they want." Shook his head. "Some debts aren't meant to be forgotten." Before she could answer, the announcement called his train. He nodded once, stepped away, and was gone. Stood still, the noise of the station rushing around her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of choice pressing against her chest. To keep disappearing, or to let herself be seen. The decision came days later, in the quietest way. She mailed the letters. All of them. Not through official channels, not stamped or sealed by handlers who would intercept them. She slipped them into a battered envelope, addressed in her neat handwriting, and trusted the ordinary post. Every word she had written, every apology, every promise, every "I'll be home soon." She let them go. And then she waited. Weeks passed. Orders came again, pressed into her hand by men in suits. Missions that didn't exist, operations she was meant to vanish into. She didn't answer. She walked away. For the first time, Cross chose not to disappear into silence. She chose to return. Not to medals, not to parades, but to a doorstep in a quiet town, where a boy with braces and wary eyes opened the door to find a woman he hadn't seen in years standing awkwardly with nothing but a duffel at her feet. She didn't know what to say. Words had always been her enemy. But he stepped forward anyway. And for the first time, Cross let silence mean something else. Not erasure, not punishment, but presence. A beginning, not an ending. The military never spoke her name again. The files stayed sealed. The patch remained on Skit, a relic no outsider would understand. Kept his promise too. He never stopped reminding the world that someone somewhere had pulled him from the dark. And in the places where men still whispered of the hollow, where silence still clung like dust, the legend of an observer who fought alone lived on. Not in the record, not in history books, but in memory. Because some victories were never meant to be written in full. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.